4,000 years ago, engineers turned deserts into gardens. This is the story of how ancient engineers redirected rivers to build the first cities and shape entire civilizations. By the end, you will understand not just how they moved water, but how that power to redirect a river redirected the course of human history itself. We will uncover how a society's collapse can be written in the salt left behind in its fields, and why a tunnel dug by hand could be more sophisticated than a modern pipeline. So, when you think of humanity's greatest achievements, does controlling nature come to mind? That unpredictable rhythm of flood and drought was the first great teacher. For a family tending a small plot of fertile soil by a riverbank, the difference between a good year and a devastating one could be a matter of inches in water level. One season, gentle overflows would deposit rich silt, nourishing the seeds they planted. The next, a raging torrent could sweep away their entire harvest, and the one after that might bring a parching drought. Watching this cycle of destruction and bounty, a profound and revolutionary idea took root. What if, instead of simply hoping for the right amount of water, they could command it? This was the primordial challenge that birthed civilization itself. Access to predictable water was not merely a resource, it was the fundamental architect of everything that followed. It allowed for surplus agriculture, which meant not everyone had to farm. That surplus supported population growth, which led to specialized roles like potters, soldiers, and administrators. This social complexity required organization, rules, and leadership. Historians and archaeologists like Carl Wittfogel pointed to this dynamic in what is often called the hydraulic hypothesis. The theory suggests that the large-scale management of water, of building and maintaining canals and dikes, required a centralized authority to coordinate the labor. In essence, control over water became a primary source of political power. The great rivers, the lifeblood of early societies, were partners in this dance, but wildly unpredictable ones. The Tigris and Euphrates could flood violently and without the seasonal regularity of the Nile. The Nile itself, while more predictable, still demanded careful observation and management to use its annual inundation effectively. This inherent conflict between human need and natural chaos forced a monumental shift in perspective. Communities could no longer be passive recipients of a river's whims. To survive and thrive, they had to become active shapers of their environment. This necessity, this urgent drive to impose order on the chaos of water, set the stage for humanity's first great engineering projects. It was the moment we stopped asking the river for permission and began learning how to negotiate with it. These early engineers were the world's first data scientists, and their laboratory was the night sky. Long before any canal was dug, the work of redirecting a river began with patient, meticulous observation. Picture a scribe in ancient Sumer under a canopy of stars, pressing marks into a damp clay tablet. He is not writing poetry or recording a battle, he is logging data. The height of this year's flood, the position of a certain star on the horizon, the phase of the moon. This was not mere record-keeping, it was a survival strategy etched in mud. For generations, these observers tracked patterns invisible within a single lifetime, building a library of environmental knowledge on shelves of baked clay. They discovered that the chaos of their world was not entirely random, it was rhythmic. The key to unlocking that rhythm lay overhead. Both the Sumerians and the Egyptians developed sophisticated lunar calendars, but their purpose was intensely practical. These were not just ritual objects, they were the original agricultural planning software. By correlating the cycles of the moon with the seasonal movements of stars like Sirius, they could make remarkably accurate predictions about the annual inundation of their life-giving rivers. A cuneiform text might note, the river rose to the level of the third marker stone in the year the star of the plough was high. This was applied science in its most foundational form. This observational bedrock transformed their entire relationship with nature. The terrifying, unpredictable flood was no longer a surprise attack. It became a scheduled event. The river's arrival could be anticipated, prepared for, and managed. This meant farmers knew when to plant to catch the receding waters, and construction crews knew when the riverbanks would be stable enough to begin work on a new canal or dike. Their engineering marvels were not acts of brute force against nature, but sophisticated negotiations based on deep, accumulated understanding. They learned to listen to the whispers of the cosmos and the murmurs of the earth, translating those signals into a blueprint for civilization. This profound connection to celestial and terrestrial rhythms turned a capricious force of destruction into a dependable resource, all because they had the patience to watch, record, and learn. With data from the stars guiding their timing, the next challenge was one of pure geometry on the ground. To coax water away from its natural channel, these ancient engineers first had to become masters of the land itself, reading its subtle slopes with an artist's eye. Their most critical tool was not a complex machine, but a profound understanding of a single, silent force, gravity. They knew water only flows downhill, and their entire civilization depended on making it flow downhill exactly where they wanted it to for miles. This demanded a new kind of vision, the ability to see a perfect, gentle gradient across a landscape of rolling hills and uneven earth. To achieve this, they developed the world's first surveying techniques. Picture a team working under the sun, stretching a long rope knotted at precise intervals between two wooden poles. By sighting along this taut line, they could establish a straight path. But straight was not enough. It had to be level or have just the right minute slope. For this, they used water's own nature as a guide, digging a shallow, water-filled trench across a distance and observing how the liquid settled gave them a true level plane, a baseline from which all other measurements could be made. An archaeological find like the Roman groma, a later instrument used for aligning right angles, shows the evolution of this principle, from simple ropes to more sophisticated tools for ensuring perfect perpendicular canals. The margin for error was vanishingly small. In a practice known as runoff farming, or when aligning a main supply canal, a slope too steep would cause the water to rush through, eroding the channel walls and carving gullies into precious farmland. A slope too shallow, however, would allow the water to stagnate, becoming a breeding ground for illness and depositing silt that would clog the very artery meant to bring life. A miscalculation of just a finger's width over a long distance could mean the difference between a thriving harvest and a failed settlement. The individuals who held this responsibility often occupied a unique role in society, the priest-engineer. They were not just technicians, they were intermediaries. Their technical skill in reading the land was wrapped in spiritual authority, as ensuring the life-giving flow of water was seen as a sacred duty, a collaboration with the divine forces of nature. With knotted ropes and sighting poles, they translated the abstract concept of gravity into a mapped reality, drawing lines of future fertility across the empty earth. Their work proved that the most monumental achievements often begin with the simplest of implements, a deep patience, and the quiet determination to persuade a river to follow a new human-made path. This silent negotiation with gravity found its grandest expression on the plains between two rivers. In ancient Sumer, where the Tigris and Euphrates carved their paths, engineers faced a paradox. The land was fertile, but the rivers were temperamental, flooding violently or receding too far. Their solution was a masterpiece of organization etched directly into the earth, a hierarchical network of canals that functioned like a vast, living circulatory system. At its heart were the massive primary channels, arteries dug straight from the river, often wide enough for small boats to pass. From these, secondary canals branched off like veins, carrying water toward city walls and temple estates. Finally, a capillary network of tiny tertiary channels, little more than ditches, delivered the life-giving flow directly to the root of every single plant in a field. The city of Ur, a glittering hub of trade and worship, was completely encircled and sustained by such a system. Archaeological surveys show canals not just for irrigation, but for drainage, for defense, and for transport, turning waterways into the streets of their commerce. This was not a casual effort, it was a matter of law and survival. The famous Code of Hammurabi, one of humanity's oldest legal documents, includes specific statutes about water management. One law states if a man has opened his canal for irrigation and been careless, and the water has flooded his neighbor's field, he shall pay his neighbor grain for the loss. Another mandates that if a man has let the water carry away the soil of a watered field, he shall measure out grain on the basis of the adjacent fields. These were not suggestions, they were the legal bedrock of civilization, proving that water rights were among the first and most sacred forms of property law. Building this network was a monumental labor. With no iron, workers dug with copper picks and stone shovels, moving millions of tons of earth by basket. To prevent the loose soil from collapsing, they reinforced canal banks with woven reed mats, sometimes waterproofing them with naturally occurring bitumen, a tar-like substance. Wooden sluice gates, lifted and lowered by ropes, acted as precise valves to control the flow into each branching channel. The system's impact went far beyond agriculture. Canals became trade routes connecting isolated city-states into a unified economic zone. Grain, pottery, and textiles could move by barge far more efficiently than by donkey. But this control over water also created a new social reality. Managing the canals required a powerful, centralized authority to coordinate labor and settle disputes. Those who controlled the sluice gates ultimately controlled the food supply, cementing a hierarchy where priests and kings held ultimate power. The Mesopotamian canal network was more than an irrigation project. It was the physical blueprint for the state itself, a template for control, order, and empire that would echo for millennia. While Mesopotamia fought its rivers, Egypt enjoyed a more graceful partnership. The Nile was not a foe to be conquered, but a reliable partner whose annual arrival was the heartbeat of the kingdom. Its inundation was so predictable that the Egyptian calendar was built around it, dividing the year into 3 seasons: the flood, the growth, and the harvest. This was a rhythm of abundance, not chaos. The Greek historian Herodotus famously observed that Egypt was the gift of the Nile, and this was not poetic exaggeration, it was a statement of fact. The entire civilization was built on the rich, black silt deposited by the river's gentle, life-giving overflow. The Egyptian engineering genius lay not in massive redirection, but in brilliant optimization. Their system was called Basin Irrigation, and it was a masterpiece of elegant simplicity. Instead of digging endless canals to bring water to the land, they shaped the land to perfectly receive the water. Across the floodplain, engineers and farmers constructed vast, shallow basins using networks of earthen dikes. When the Nile rose, they would open gaps in these dikes, allowing the chocolate-brown floodwaters to pour in and fill each basin like a giant, temporary pond. They would then seal the openings, trapping the water and its precious cargo of silt. For weeks, the water would stand, allowing the silt to settle and the moisture to soak deep into the thirsty soil. Then, just before planting season, they would drain the excess water back into the receding Nile, leaving behind a perfectly fertilized, deeply saturated field ready for seeds. This was low-tech, high-efficiency agriculture on a monumental scale. It required immense coordination, of course, to build and maintain the dikes and manage the flooding across entire regions. reinforcing the power of the pharaoh's administration. But the system's beauty was its sustainability. It worked with the river's natural cycle, not against it. There was no struggle to force water uphill, no constant battle against salinization from over-irrigation. The Nile did the heavy lifting, and Egyptian engineers simply provided the perfect vessel to catch its gift. This harmonious approach fostered a stability that is almost unimaginable to us today. While Mesopotamia saw the rise and fall of empires amid environmental strain, Egypt's basin irrigation system sustained its core agricultural heartland for nearly 3,000 years with remarkable consistency. It stands as a powerful ancient lesson that sometimes the most profound engineering involves careful observation and subtle guidance, creating a lasting partnership with the forces of nature rather than declaring war upon them. Yet for all the power of Mesopotamia and the grace of Egypt, a third civilization achieved something that feels shockingly modern. In the fertile plains of the Indus Valley, around 4,500 years ago, engineers built cities that would not look out of place in a textbook on 20th century urban planning. Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa were marvels of order, their streets laid out in precise grids, their houses made from uniformly sized baked bricks. But their true genius lay beneath the surface in a world of water and waste. These cities developed the world's first comprehensive urban sanitation system, a network so advanced it would not be matched in scale or sophistication for thousands of years. At the heart of every home was a brick-lined well, providing a private, clean water source. Wastewater from baths and kitchens did not simply spill into the street. It flowed through covered terracotta drains built into the walls, which connected to larger public sewers running beneath the main avenues. These main drains were wide enough for a person to walk through, constructed with precisely laid bricks and equipped with manhole covers for maintenance. The system relied entirely on gravity, with a subtle, consistent slope engineered into every channel to ensure everything flowed away from the living spaces toward the outskirts of the city. The crown jewel of this hydraulic society was the Great Bath of Mohenjo-Daro, a large, waterproofed public tank likely used for ritual purification. It was fed by its own well and drained by an equally sophisticated outlet, demonstrating that water management was woven into both the practical and spiritual fabric of life. This was a society where civic planning and hydrology were inseparable. The uniform brick sizes and the strict alignment of streets with the water channels point to a powerful, centralized authority, one that could standardize construction across an entire civilization spanning over 1 million square kilometers. They likely diverted water from the mighty Indus River and its now lost sister, the Gaga Hakra, through a network of gravity-fed channels that supplied neighborhoods and continuously flushed the waste away. This promoted public health on an unprecedented scale, protecting the population from waterborne illnesses that plagued other ancient cities. And yet, this brilliant, clean, and orderly civilization presents one of history's great mysteries. By around 1900 BCE, the great cities were being abandoned. While the reasons are complex and likely involved shifts in trade and climate, many researchers point to a profound environmental change, the shifting courses of the very rivers they had mastered. The Gaga Hakra may have dried up or changed its path dramatically, starving the southern settlements of their water source. It is a humbling reminder that even the most advanced human engineering exists within a larger, dynamic natural system. The Indus Valley civilization did not fall because its technology failed, but perhaps because the river it had so carefully partnered with decided to move on, leaving behind silent, spotless streets and a powerful lesson in both the reach and the limits of our control. While the Indus harnessed water for cleanliness, another river demanded a far more aggressive form of control. The Yellow River in China did not offer a gentle partnership or a predictable gift. It presented a relentless, existential threat. Carrying immense loads of fine, yellow loess soil from the northern plains, its waters were thick and heavy, constantly raising its own bed. This meant the river could and did burst its banks with catastrophic force, unleashing floods that could drown entire regions and sometimes even carve an entirely new path to the sea, leaving millions to face hardship in its wake. Its ancient name, the River of Sorrow, was not poetic. It was a stark historical record. To survive alongside such a volatile force, Chinese engineers adopted a strategy of monumental confrontation. They did not just guide the water, they attempted to cage it. Their primary tool was the dike, a massive earthen wall built to constrain the river's flow within an artificial channel. But building with loess soil, the very sediment that made the river so dangerous, was a constant battle. These dikes, while sturdy, were vulnerable to erosion and required ceaseless reinforcement, a labor of Sisyphus played out on a continental scale. The legendary founder of the Xia dynasty, Yu the Great, was celebrated not for military conquests, but for his mastery of water. Stories tell of how he spent 13 years dredging channels and directing floods, working alongside the people until his hands were calloused and his body worn. His success in taming the waters established a profound political principle that would echo for millennia, that the mandate of heaven, the divine right to rule, was intrinsically linked to the ability to control the Yellow River. A ruler who failed to maintain the dikes was seen as having lost heaven's favor, often followed by unrest and dynastic change. This struggle forged the Chinese state itself. Managing the river required a vast, permanently organized workforce, meticulous record-keeping, and a centralized authority capable of marshalling resources from across the kingdom. The bureaucratic apparatus needed to coordinate the dredging of silt-clogged channels, the repair of breached dikes after every flood season, and the feeding of the thousands of conscripted laborers became the backbone of imperial administration. Over centuries, the system grew more sophisticated. Engineers developed layered dike networks with inner walls to handle normal flow and outer walls as emergency barriers. They even created deliberate overflow basins, areas of countryside designed to flood safely in order to relieve pressure on the main channel during extreme events. This was a civilization engaged in a perpetual, grinding negotiation with a titanic force. The collective identity of the Chinese people, particularly in the north, was shaped by this shared, monumental effort. The fight to redirect the River of Sorrow did more than protect farmland. It redirected the very course of history, binding millions together under a common purpose and a central power, proving that sometimes a civilization is defined not by the resources it enjoys, but by the relentless challenges it is forced to overcome. But where does one find a river when the surface of the earth offers only dust? On the vast, arid plateaus of ancient Persia, the challenge was not managing a raging flood, but conjuring water from nothingness. Here, surface rivers were fleeting ghosts, and survival demanded a different kind of magic, one that reached into the very bones of the mountains. The Persian answer was not a canal, but a Qanat, a masterpiece of subterranean engineering that created rivers where none existed. This was the art of harvesting hidden water, a brilliant form of indirect river redirection that pulled life from the depths. The process began with locating a life-giving aquifer, a saturated layer of rock and sand, often at the foot of a mountain where rainfall seeped deep into the earth. From this mother well, teams of incredibly skilled tunnelers known as Mechanis began their slow, dark work. They did not dig a single, endless tunnel. Instead, they planned a gentle, precise slope from the aquifer to their distant settlement. Along this invisible line, they dug a series of vertical shafts, spaced like stitches across the desert floor. Each shaft served as an entry point to excavate the horizontal tunnel below, a vent for air, and a way to remove the endless baskets of spoil. Over years, sometimes generations, they inched forward, connecting the shafts from below until a continuous, gently sloping underground channel was born. The genius was in its simplicity and sustainability. By keeping the water underground, the Qanat eliminated the devastating evaporation that would have claimed a surface canal in the desert sun. It also acted as a natural filter, the sand and gravel layers purifying the water as it flowed. The result was a cool, clean, and constant stream that emerged suddenly into the daylight at the tunnel's end, a miraculous fountain in the desert that could irrigate entire orchards and supply a city. This technology was so effective it became a silent engine of civilization along the Silk Road, spreading from Persia to Arabia, North Africa, and even to Spain. It represented a profound philosophical shift. While the Chinese battled their river and the Egyptians partnered with theirs, the Persian Muqannis practiced a form of deep listening. Theirs was not an engineering of confrontation, but of coaxing, a patient conversation with the hidden veins of the planet. They understood that to redirect a river, you sometimes had to discover it first, not on the surface, but in the secret, life-sustaining darkness beneath. The dedication of a new canal was an event that shook the heavens. In ancient Sumer, a king would stand before the freshly cut channel, its waters shimmering under the sun, and declare this work a gift to Enki, the god of wisdom, magic, and the sweet waters that flowed beneath the earth. This was not mere ceremony, it was the essential first step. To redirect a river was to alter the divine order of the world, an act that required not just engineering skill, but sacred permission. The entire endeavor was wrapped in a powerful mythology that gave it meaning and mobilized the will of an entire people. Consider the Babylonian creation epic, the Enuma Elish. In its verses, the god Marduk does not create the world from nothing. He organizes it from a state of watery chaos. He defeats the primordial goddess of the saltwater sea, Tiamat, and from her divided body, he structures the heavens and the earth, placing the Euphrates and the Tigris in their proper courses. This story was not just a tale of origins, it was a cosmic blueprint. It told the people that their own work of dividing chaotic waters with canals and dikes, of imposing order on the unpredictable flood, was a sacred imitation of the gods themselves. Every dredged channel mirrored Marduk's act of creation, turning a practical task into a holy duty. This ideological fusion placed the priest-king at the very center of power. He was the indispensable intermediary, the one who could interpret the will of the gods and command the labor to fulfill it. By claiming a divine mandate for a new irrigation project, he transformed back-breaking communal toil into a form of collective worship. A farmer conscripted to dig for weeks was not just moving earth, he was participating in a ritual that sustained the cosmos. This belief system provided the social glue for projects that spanned generations, outlasting any single ruler's life. It also cemented a rigid social hierarchy, as the temple complexes, believed to be the literal homes of the gods on earth, became the administrative centers for water distribution. Theologians and engineers were often the same individuals, calculating water shares for downstream villages based on religious calendars and divine decrees. Theology became the practical framework for resource management, a system of belief that prevented conflict and organized cooperation on a massive scale. The spiritual and the practical were not separate realms, they were the twin currents that powered civilization forward. To build a canal was to perform a prayer in mud and water, ensuring that the community's survival was forever embedded in its deepest stories about the nature of the universe. The spiritual mandate to build was answered by a human tide of labor. Under the relentless desert sun, the sound of 1,000 voices rose in rhythmic chant, not in prayer, but to synchronize the heave of a basket or the pull of a heavy sledge. This was the physical reality of redirecting a river, a symphony of coordinated human effort that moved mountains of earth one handful at a time. The true innovation was not the copper pick or the woven basket, but the social machinery required to organize and sustain thousands of people toward a single, monumental goal. Initially, these projects likely sprang from communal need, a shared understanding that a new canal or a reinforced dike would benefit the entire village. Neighbors would contribute their labor as an investment in their own survival, a practice rooted in mutual aid, but as ambitions grew, so did the scale of control. This communal effort evolved into one of humanity's first formal systems of organized labor, the corvée. Under this system, citizens owed the state a certain number of days of work each year as a form of tax, paid not with grain or coin, but with their own physical strength. Egyptian tomb paintings and administrative papyri give us a vivid window into this world. They show work gangs with specific names, like the crew of the Western River or the gang of the powerful king, each under the watchful eye of a foreman with a scribe at his side recording their days. Rations of bread, beer, onions, and fish were distributed with bureaucratic precision, the fuel that powered this human engine. The organization was meticulous, breaking the impossible task of moving millions of tons of soil into manageable quotas for each team, each day. This mobilization was a double-edged sword of civilization. On one hand, it built the arteries that fed cities and protected populations, creating shared infrastructure that lifted everyone. On the other, it concentrated immense power in the hands of a small elite. The authority to command such labor allowed rulers and priests to build not just canals, but towering temples, lavish tombs, and imposing palaces. The ability to feed, clothe, and direct thousands of conscripted workers for months on end was a technology in itself, a social technology more complex than any sluice gate. It redefined the relationship between the individual and the state, turning collective need into a duty enforced by authority. The true foundation of these early empires, then, was not just laid in stone or water, but in the coordinated movement of countless hands, a force that could reshape continents as surely as any river. The hands that built these empires knew the feel of sun-baked earth and the sting of reeds. The true genius of ancient hydraulic engineering was not just in its grand designs, but in the humble, ingenious materials that brought those designs to life, transforming the very soil underfoot into a barrier against the water it once held. The earliest canal builders in Mesopotamia worked with what they had, and what they had was mud and plants. They discovered that simply packing earth into a dike was not enough. The water would find a way through. Their solution was a layered approach, like crafting a giant earthen basket. They would line the crucial slopes of a canal with tightly woven reed mats, creating a flexible, reinforcing mesh that held the soil in place. To waterproof this, they tapped into natural oil seeps using raw bitumen, a tar-like substance, as a primitive sealant. It was a brilliant recycling of the landscape, turning riverbank reeds and oily pits into the tools of civilization. But as ambitions grew, so did the material science. The need for permanence, for structures that could withstand decades of rushing water, pushed innovation forward. The fired brick, a Mesopotamian invention born of kilns meant for pottery, became a revolutionary building block. Baked in intense heat, these bricks were resistant to water erosion in a way that sun-dried mud could never be. Engineers began to use them to line the most critical sections of canals, at bends where current was strongest, or at the mouths of sluice gates. The sluice gate itself was a masterpiece of simple mechanics. Typically a thick plank of wood or a block of stone, it would be set into grooves carved into the brick or stone lining of a canal. By raising or lowering it with ropes and levers, a single operator could precisely meter the lifeblood of an entire district, a tangible expression of the power that came from controlling flow. This material evolution reached a stunning early peak with the Assyrians. In the 9th century BCE, King Sennacherib ordered the construction of a vast system to bring water to his capital, Nineveh. Part of this system was the aqueduct at Jerwan, a structure that still stuns archaeologists. Here, Assyrian engineers did not use brick but stone. They constructed a raised channel over 1,000 feet long, supported by massive arches, and lined it with a form of waterproof concrete. This was a monumental leap, using cut stone blocks and a lime-based mortar that could cure and harden even under constant water exposure. The Jerwin Aqueduct stands as a powerful testament to the cumulative nature of this technology. It was not an isolated miracle, but the result of centuries of trial and error, of observing which mortar recipes failed and which held, of learning how to shape and set stone to resist immense pressure. This practical knowledge, passed down and refined through generations, formed a silent library of solutions. A Babylonian engineer understood the packing quality of a certain clay because a Sumerian had recorded its failure 2 centuries prior. The use of bitumen as a sealant spread from Mesopotamia to the Indus Valley, where they used it to line their great bath. Each civilization added a chapter, slowly perfecting the art of turning local geology into hydraulic wonder. The true foundation of their world was not just water, but this deep material intimacy with the earth itself, a patient dialogue between human need and the stubborn, yielding substance of the planet. But this intimate dialogue with the earth came with a hidden price. Did the very act of shaping their world, of bending rivers to their will, also plant the seeds of their own unraveling? Every grand engineering solution, it seems, initiated a slow, silent conversation with the environment, one that could take centuries to reveal its final word. The bounty was immediate and glorious, but the costs were often deferred, accumulating in the soil and the water in ways the original builders could scarcely perceive. This is the story of long-term environmental feedback, where the triumph of redirection carried within it the blueprint for future strain. Consider the case of Mesopotamia, the very cradle of canal-based civilization. Their system was a marvel of delivery, bringing life-giving water to sun-baked fields, yet it lacked a critical counterpart, a method for that water to truly leave. In the hot, dry climate, water applied to fields would evaporate rapidly, leaving behind all the dissolved minerals it had carried, primarily salt. With no natural drainage to flush these salts away, they accumulated in the soil year after year, decade after decade, slowly poisoning the very earth they had worked so hard to fertilize. Ancient cuneiform tablets tell a silent story of this creeping crisis. Early records boast of abundant barley harvests, but over time the crop reports shift. Barley, a relatively salt-sensitive grain, begins to fail. Farmers are forced to switch to more salt-tolerant, but less nutritious and valuable crops like wheat, and eventually even wheat struggles. Some tablets even mention the white crust of salt appearing on the surface of fields, a visible sign of the land's exhaustion. This was not a sudden collapse, but a slow, grinding decline in agricultural productivity, a diminishing return on their greatest investment. It placed increasing stress on the social and economic foundations of city-states, likely contributing to shifts in power, abandonment of some areas, and a growing vulnerability to other pressures. Similarly, the act of clearing vast tracts of land for new fields, while necessary for feeding growing populations, had another unintended effect. Removing forests and deep-rooted plants made the soil more vulnerable to erosion. When rains came, they washed unprecedented amounts of silt into the carefully engineered canals, clogging them with sediment. This required constant, back-breaking dredging to maintain, and in some cases could even alter the gentle slopes of the channels, ruining their flow. Worse, all that extra silt pouring into the rivers themselves could raise their beds, making them more prone to catastrophic flooding or causing them to jump their banks entirely, abandoning the canals that depended on them. These stories are not mere historical footnotes, they are profound ancient warnings. They remind us that every technological intervention creates a dynamic, living relationship with a complex system. The environment is not a passive canvas, but an active participant that responds, adapts, and pushes back. The legacy of those salinized fields, now barren stretches in the desert, speaks to a fundamental truth about sustainability. A solution is only brilliant if it accounts for the second and third order consequences, for the slow, silent changes that unfold long after the architects are gone. It urges us to view our own engineering ambitions not as a final victory over nature, but as the opening move in an endless, delicate negotiation. Far from the great desert rivers, another civilization faced a water paradox of its own. In the dense, green heart of the Mesoamerican rainforest, the Maya built towering cities that seemed to defy their environment. This was not a land of predictable, life-giving rivers, but a world of intense seasonal rains followed by punishing dry periods. Here, the challenge was not redirecting a single mighty flow, but capturing, conserving, and choreographing every drop that fell from the sky. Their genius was not in conquering a river, but in becoming one by reshaping the very skin of the earth. They looked at the low-lying, waterlogged swamps known as bajos and saw not wasteland but potential. Their innovation was the raised field, a simple yet transformative concept built on a grand scale. Communities would dredge networks of canals through these wetlands, piling the rich, excavated muck onto adjacent platforms. The result was a checkerboard landscape of fertile planting beds elevated above the seasonal flood, surrounded by canals that acted as reservoirs. This was a closed-loop system of astonishing elegance. The canals drained excess rainwater from the fields, preventing root rot. That same standing water provided habitat for fish and turtles, adding protein to the diet. Aquatic plants like water lilies, which thrived in the canals, could be harvested for food or used as green fertilizer, replenishing the beds. During the dry season, moisture from the canals would seep into the raised fields, sustaining crops. The canals themselves became highways, allowing farmers to move harvests by canoe right from their fields to the city center. For decades, the true scale of this hydraulic landscape remained hidden beneath the jungle canopy, guessed at from small excavations. Then, modern technology peeled back the green veil. The use of LiDAR, a laser mapping technique that digitally strips away the forest, has revealed a staggering truth. Around cities like Tikal and Edzna, the jungle floor is not wild, it is engineered. The imagery shows vast, geometric grids of canals and raised fields stretching for miles, a testament to regional planning and management that supported populations far denser than once thought. This was not small-scale gardening, it was watershed management on a civilizational scale. The Maya were not just redirecting water, they were sculpting an entire ecosystem to be more productive and resilient. They turned a problem of too much water in one season and too little in another into a permanent, self-renewing agricultural engine. This case study profoundly expands our definition of what it meant to control water. It moves beyond the familiar image of a canal snaking from a riverbank to a vision of an entire landscape purposefully redesigned as a hydraulic machine. In the rainforest, the Maya found their river not in a single channel, but in the seasonal pulse of the sky itself, and they built a civilization by learning to hold that pulse in the palm of their hand. But a stone channel marching across a valley on towering arches represents a different kind of ambition entirely. The Romans looked at the ancient logic of redirecting rivers and asked a new question: what if the river came to us? Their aqueducts were not about managing agricultural water. They were about conquering distance itself, creating artificial rivers in the sky to feed the beating heart of an empire. This was the grand synthesis, taking the core principle of gravity-driven flow and scaling it up to an almost absurd degree of precision and endurance. The water commissioner of Rome, Sextus Julius Frontinus, wrote with palpable pride about his charge, stating, "I will now pass to the great merits of the city of Rome, to which the aqueducts, their number, their arrangement, and their quality bear witness. For him, these were not mere utilities, they were the very proof of Roman greatness. The system was a masterpiece of interception. Instead of trying to tame a massive, unpredictable river at its flood stage, Roman engineers went to the source. They would find a pure, reliable spring in the hills many miles from the city, capture its flow in a stone collection basin, and then begin the patient, invisible work of persuasion. From that point, the water would never touch the ground until it reached a public fountain in Rome. The channel, or specus, was a carefully sloped stone conduit, often covered to keep the water clean and cool. Its gradient was the product of breathtakingly accurate surveying, sometimes as little as a few inches of drop per mile. To maintain this perfect slope across hills and valleys, they employed every technique in the engineer's handbook. When they met a hill, they tunneled through it. When they met a depression, they built a bridge of arches to carry the channel level, those iconic structures we recognize today. But for most of its journey, the aqueduct was a hidden thing, running in a subterranean trench to protect it and to avoid the property disputes of the surface world. This was river redirection stripped of all unpredictability. The aqueduct created a perfectly controlled, single-purpose stream whose entire reason for existence was urban life. Its water supplied vast public baths, ornate fountains that cooled and beautified the city, and the latrines that served the populace. While some privileged homes had private taps, the system was fundamentally a public one, a direct gift from the emperor to the people, reinforcing the social contract of imperial power. The abundance of clean water flowing constantly into the city became a powerful tool of political theater and public health, reducing illness and creating a tangible symbol of Roman order over chaos. The aqueduct was the ultimate expression of a hydraulic empire, no longer just responding to a river's needs, but drafting a new one into permanent, obedient service. The water that nourished the crops also nourished a new kind of power, one that flowed not from strength or charisma, but from the control of an invisible valve. This was the profound social ripple effect of hydraulic engineering, a force that did far more than shape the land. It shaped the very structure of society, irrigating the deep roots of social inequality. The monumental task of redirecting a river could not be accomplished by a village acting alone. It demanded a new breed of individual, the manager, the planner, the overseer. Someone had to calculate the labor, organize the food supplies, settle disputes over land and water rights, and decide which fields received water first during a drought. This necessity birthed the world's first specialized administrative class, a group whose power was derived not from farming or fighting, but from knowledge and coordination. They stood apart from the laborers moving earth, their authority etched in clay tablets and papyrus scrolls rather than calloused hands. In this system, control over the essential resource of water became the ultimate source of social leverage. The elite who managed the canals and dikes held the life of the community in their hands. They could dictate terms, demanding a portion of the harvest as a tax for the water that made it possible. This tax in kind, paid in grain or other goods, flowed directly to the temples and palaces, feeding the very bureaucracy that collected it and funding projects that further solidified their status. The ability to grant or withhold water access became a subtle yet devastating mechanism of social control. A downstream village that questioned the central authority might find its water allotment mysteriously reduced the following season. This power was embedded directly into the landscape itself, a hierarchy written in mud and water. Nowhere is this link clearer than in pharaonic Egypt. The entire basin irrigation system along the Nile required exquisite, empire-wide coordination. Someone had to decide when to breach the dikes to flood the basins, and crucially, when to drain them, a timing that had to be synchronized across hundreds of miles to prevent chaos. This logistical miracle was managed by the pharaoh's vast administration, a network of scribes and officials who reported back to the central royal authority. By positioning himself as the indispensable coordinator of the Nile's life-giving cycle, the pharaoh cemented both his political and his divine authority. He was not just a king, he was the guarantor of the flood, the partner of the gods in maintaining cosmic order, or Mat. To oppose him was to risk the bounty of the river itself. This created a social contract written in water, obedience in exchange for nourishment. The irrigation ditches that fed every field were also channels of power, carrying the authority of the state directly to the most remote farm. The infrastructure they built to shape the river, in turn, shaped a rigid social pyramid, proving that the stones and canals of an engineering project could mold human relationships as decisively as they molded the course of a stream. This silent dialogue of ingenuity could not be contained by borders or mountains. The same caravan routes that carried silks and spices across continents were also highways for an invisible cargo, the mental blueprints for controlling water. A trader from Persia might pause at an oasis in Central Asia, not just to drink, but to study the local well, exchanging stories with a merchant from the Indus Valley about the best way to line a canal to prevent seepage. This was technological diffusion in its most organic form, a slow, persistent cross-pollination of ideas that traveled with every footstep, every loaded camel, and every ship that sailed the monsoon winds. The movement of hydraulic knowledge reveals a profound truth. Innovation was rarely an isolated spark. It was a networked, cumulative process, a continuous conversation between civilizations separated by vast distances but united by a common need. Consider the journey of the Qanat. Born in the arid highlands of ancient Persia, this technology of harvesting groundwater was too valuable to remain a secret. As Persian influence and trade expanded, so did the knowledge of how to tap the earth's hidden veins. Through the Arabian Peninsula, the technique traveled with merchants and settlers, transforming the hydrology of oases and enabling permanent settlements in places like Oman. Muslim engineers later carried the concept across North Africa, where Qanat systems, often called Fagara, became the lifeblood of communities in the Sahara. The dialogue did not stop at the Mediterranean. Spanish colonists, encountering the technique during their rule in the Iberian Peninsula, recognized its potential for the arid regions of the New World, introducing what they called galerías filtrantes to places like Mexico and Peru. At each stop, the core idea was adapted, the dimensions of the shafts adjusted for local geology, the construction methods blended with available materials. It was not a patent being copied, but a principle being understood and reborn. A similar story unfolds with the Noria, the magnificent water-lifting wheel. Its origins lie in the Hellenistic world, a marriage of Greek engineering and the urgent needs of farmers in places like Syria. But it was within the Islamic world, from the 8th century onward, that this device found its most enthusiastic adopters and brilliant innovators. Islamic engineers scaled them up, constructing giant wheels on the Orontes River in Syria that could lift water over 50 feet to feed aqueducts, using the river's own current as the power source. These designs then diffused east and west, carried by scholars, artisans, and technical manuscripts. The knowledge reached Al-Andalus in Spain, where norias dotted the countryside, and from there, the concept influenced European water mill technology. This was not a one-way street. Chinese chain pumps and Persian wind catchers for cooling entered the global exchange, each culture contributing a piece to the shared puzzle of survival. A Roman aqueduct builder would have been fascinated by a Maya-raised field, and a Mesopotamian canal engineer could have learned from an Inca terrace. The slow migration of these ideas shows that the history of hydrology is not a series of isolated triumphs, but a single, sprawling story of human adaptation, where every solution whispered along a trade route became a seed for another civilization's resilience. The groaning rhythm of a giant wooden wheel marked a new chapter in the ancient conversation with rivers. In the cities of Roman Syria and later in the orchards of Islamic Spain, the Noria stood as a monumental machine, its hollow ceramic pots dipping with a steady cadence into the flowing current, rising full and tipping their precious cargo into a high stone aqueduct. This was no longer just guiding water along the Earth's gentle slopes. This was defying gravity itself, lifting a river into the sky. These water-lifting machines, the Noria and its cousin the Sakia, solved a problem gravity-fed canals could not: elevation. They allowed engineers to effectively redirect water vertically, conquering the final barrier between a distant water source and the high ground where people needed to live and grow food. The Noria was a masterpiece of passive engineering powered entirely by the river it served. Its large paddles caught the current, turning the entire wheel, and a clever arrangement of pots on the rim did the rest. Each pot would submerge, fill, be carried to the apex of the wheel, and then pour out into a waiting channel, all through the relentless, free energy of the moving water. It was a perpetual motion machine of sorts, a tireless, automated servant that could lift water dozens of feet, feeding entire urban districts or hillside farms without a single human pushing or pulling. But where the river's current was too weak or the water needed to come from a deep, still well, a different machine took over: the Sakia. This was a more active technology, typically driven by a blindfolded ox or donkey walking in a circle. Its genius lay in a simple gear system, a vertical cogwheel turned by the animal's axle that engaged a horizontal one attached to a chain of pots. This gearing translated the animal's circular plod into a powerful vertical lift, capable of drawing water from remarkable depth. The Sakia's distinctive, rhythmic squeal became the sound of life in arid regions, its mechanical heartbeat pumping water from the hidden reserves of the earth. The impact of these machines was transformative. They unlocked previously unusable land. Steep hillsides could be terraced and irrigated, multiplying the amount of arable soil in mountainous regions. Within cities, they enabled the development of elevated neighborhoods, supplying public baths, fountains, and homes on hills that were once too far from a reliable water source. This vertical reach dramatically increased both agricultural output and urban capacity, allowing populations to grow and settle in more diverse, defensible locations. More than just tools, the Noria and Sakia represent the mechanization of hydrology. For millennia, water management had been about shaping a static landscape, carving canals and raising dikes. These machines introduced a dynamic, moving component to that landscape. They were not just infrastructure, they were kinetic sculpture, symbols of an increasing ambition to not only negotiate with nature's flow, but to harness its very force to perform work. The turning wheel became a potent symbol of ingenuity, a moving testament to the ancient engineers' desire to add muscle to their will, and in doing so, lift the possibilities of civilization to a whole new level. The rhythmic squeal of the Sakia was the sound of daily survival, but the blare of trumpets and the beat of drums signaled something far greater, a moment of collective rebirth. When a new canal was ready to drink from the river, or when the annual dredging was complete, the worksite transformed into a sacred stage. This was not merely a technical achievement, it was a festival, a profound ritual where engineering met ceremony to renew the very covenant between the people and their world. In ancient Egypt, the opening of the Canal Festival was a spectacle of state power and divine gratitude. The pharaoh himself, in his role as the living embodiment of the god Horus, would travel to the head of the new waterway. Before a gathered multitude, he would strike a ceremonial dam with a golden mattock, the first symbolic cut that released the pent-up waters. As the river rushed into the Virgin Channel, priests made offerings to Hapi, the god of the annual inundation, while musicians played and dancers performed. The message was unmistakable. The ruler was not just an administrator, but the indispensable catalyst for the land's fertility, his action mirroring the primordial act of creation that brought order from chaos. Similarly, in Mesopotamia, the cleaning of the canals each year was preceded by rituals to appease Enki, the lord of the sweet waters. Statues of the god were carried in procession along the banks, and communities would offer songs and food to ensure his blessing for the vital work ahead. These ceremonies served a deeply practical function. They mobilized the communal spirit for the back-breaking labor of maintenance, framing a shared duty as a sacred honor. They also cemented the agricultural calendar into the cultural consciousness, marking the transition from one season of work to the next with celebration, not just toil. More than anything, they embedded the hydraulic infrastructure into the heartbeat of cultural life. A canal was not a cold ditch. It was a character in their stories, a recipient of their prayers, a testament to their shared identity. Its annual renewal through ritual ensured its physical preservation across generations, because its care was woven into tradition and collective memory. To neglect the canals was not just poor engineering, it was an affront to the gods and a betrayal of the ancestors. This fusion of the practical and the spiritual turned water management from a mere technical discipline into a core cultural value, a continuous performance that reminded everyone, from the king to the farmer, that their survival was a collaborative act with the cosmos itself. The turning wheels and sacred festivals spoke of control, but the Earth's climate held the final, unanswerable veto. How many of these brilliant, sprawling water systems ultimately fell victim to the very unpredictability they were engineered to conquer? This is perhaps the most humbling perspective of all, viewing the collapse of mighty empires not through war or invasion, but through the slow, silent failure of the hydrological pact they had forged with their land. Consider the Akkadian Empire, which unified Mesopotamia around 4,300 years ago. Its power was built on the grain from irrigated fields, a bounty fed by the Tigris and Euphrates. Yet within a few generations, this powerful state disintegrated. Ancient clay tablets from that time speak not of military defeat, but of a profound environmental crisis. They describe a world where salt whitened the fields, where the rains failed, and where the price of grain skyrocketed. For a long time, historians debated whether this was just a bad period or something more. Then, science provided a stunning answer. Researchers drilling into ocean sediments and analyzing ancient stalagmites found evidence of a monumental, centuries-long drought that gripped the region right at the time of Akkad's collapse. The very rivers that were the empire's lifeblood simply could not provide enough water to sustain its population and its complex, thirsty infrastructure. The canals, so carefully engineered for a certain flow, became empty, dusty scars on the landscape. A similar story unfolds half a world away with the classic Maya. Their ingenious raised fields and reservoirs were calibrated to a specific rhythm of rainy and dry seasons. But paleoclimatic data from lakebed sediments tells a story of a climate that stopped cooperating. Evidence points to a series of intense, multi-year droughts between the 8th and 10th centuries, precisely when many great city-states were abandoned. Their reservoirs, designed to hold water through a normal dry period, evaporated under a relentless sun. Their agricultural systems, so perfectly adapted to one climate regime, could not adjust when that regime shifted permanently. This hydraulic perspective reframes these collapses. It does not see the engineers as failures. They were brilliant innovators who solved the problems their world presented. But they were operating within a system far larger than any canal network, the global climate system. Their solutions were built for a certain range of variability, a known set of extremes. When the climate itself stepped outside those parameters, when a megadrought lasted not for years but for generations, even the most resilient adaptations could be overwhelmed. The result was not just crop failure, but a cascading social collapse. Famine strained the social contract. The authority of rulers who claimed to control the water was shattered, and communities fragmented as people migrated in search of the one resource they could no longer command. This ancient lesson echoes powerfully today. It reminds us that our own monumental engineering, our dams and aqueducts and irrigation districts, are also built on a set of assumptions about rainfall, snowpack, and river flow. They exist within a planetary system that is not static, but dynamic and, as we now know, increasingly volatile. The story of ancient hydrology ultimately teaches us about both the breathtaking power of human ingenuity and its profound limits, a reminder that every civilization, no matter how advanced, negotiates its survival with a climate that holds all the cards. The principles etched into those clay tablets did not fade with the empires that wrote them. They flowed forward, an unbroken current of knowledge that now pulses through the very satellites orbiting our planet. The legacy of those ancient engineers is not confined to ruins. It lives in the DNA of modern water law, the concrete of our mightiest dams, and the algorithms managing vast irrigation districts. Our contemporary struggle to share and sustain freshwater resources is, in many ways, a direct continuation of the negotiations that began on the banks of the Tigris and Euphrates. Consider the legal frameworks that govern water in arid regions. In the western United States, the doctrine of prior appropriation, often summarized as first in time, first in right, is a direct philosophical descendant of ancient customs. It echoes the same fundamental challenge. How do you allocate a scarce, life-giving resource among competing users? 4,000 years ago, a Sumerian farmer downstream from a temple estate had to trust that the upstream sluice gate would be opened according to customary law. Today, a rancher in Colorado holds a water right with a specific priority date, a legal claim that functions much like those ancient entitlements, establishing a clear hierarchy during times of shortage. The organizational scale of our projects also carries ancient echoes. The monumental public works of the modern era, from the Hoover Dam to China's South-North Water Transfer Project, require a mobilization of labor, capital, and planning that would feel intimately familiar to an Egyptian overseer. While we no longer rely on a corvée system, the underlying need for a powerful, centralized authority to coordinate such vast endeavors remains unchanged. Our modern bureaucracies are the direct descendants of those early administrative classes, managing budgets and environmental impact statements instead of grain rations and labor rosters, but serving the same core function, turning collective will into altered geography. Even our scientific understanding builds on their foundational observations. The ancient surveyor calculating a gradient with a knotted rope and a water level was exploring the same physics that engineers now use to model continental-scale aqueducts. Their careful tracking of flood cycles was the first step toward modern hydrology, the science of predicting water movement. Today, we use satellite imagery to monitor snowpack and soil moisture, and sophisticated models to forecast drought, but the goal is identical: to anticipate the behavior of water to secure our survival. This is the profound, living legacy. It is not merely that we still build canals, but that we still grapple with the same essential questions they first posed. How do we share a river that crosses borders? How do we balance immediate need against long-term sustainability? How do we distribute the political power that comes with controlling the tap? Our international water treaties, like those for the Nile or the Colorado River, are modern versions of the diplomatic codes that once existed between Mesopotamian city-states. The challenge of salinization that weakened Sumeria is now a critical issue for farmers in Australia and California, driving research into advanced drainage and salt-tolerant crops. The thread is continuous, from the priest engineer interpreting the stars to the civil engineer interpreting satellite data. the mission persists to observe, to understand, and to carefully negotiate our place within the water cycle. Their pioneering work established the very framework of the conversation we are still having today, a conversation that will ultimately determine the shape of civilizations yet to come. A quiet revolution is happening in the deserts and jungles of the world, one that sees not with shovels but with radio waves and lasers. Modern archaeologists are no longer just digging in the dirt. They are listening to it, using technologies like ground-penetrating radar to map the ghostly outlines of buried canals and long-filled reservoirs. From the air, drones stitch together thousands of photographs to create hyper-detailed three-dimensional models of ancient field systems, revealing patterns of labor and intention that are completely invisible from the ground. This technological renaissance is fundamentally rewriting our understanding of ancient hydrology, not by discovering new artifacts, but by revealing the breathtaking scale of the systems those artifacts were part of. We are moving from studying isolated monuments to comprehending entire engineered landscapes, and in doing so, we are finally giving voice to the anonymous planners whose grand designs have been sleeping beneath the soil for millennia. Perhaps the most stunning example of this new vision comes from the jungles of Cambodia. For centuries, the temples of Angkor Wat stood as the solitary testament to a mighty empire. But when researchers began flying LiDAR, a laser mapping system that digitally strips away the forest canopy, an astonishing truth emerged. The jungle floor was not wild, it was meticulously organized. The LiDAR maps revealed a vast, low-density urban sprawl interconnected by an incredibly complex hydraulic network. There were massive reservoirs called barrays, canals, embankments, and even elevated roads designed to stay above the floodwaters. Angkor was not just a ceremonial center, it was a hydraulic city, a machine built to capture, store, and redistribute the intense monsoon rains. The system was so sophisticated it likely managed water for both agriculture and symbolic purposes, with the great reservoirs reflecting the Temple Mountains in a display of cosmological engineering. Similar LiDAR surveys in the Americas have unveiled equally profound landscapes. In places like Belize and Bolivia, lasers have detected the subtle ridges and channels of ancient raised fields and canal networks built by pre-Columbian societies, showing agricultural systems that supported large populations in challenging environments. Back on the ground, tools like ground-penetrating radar allow archaeologists to trace the path of a silted-up canal without moving a single shovelful of earth, preserving the site while mapping its secrets. These technologies do more than just impress us with scale, they force a profound shift in perspective. We can now see that an isolated temple or a lone canal was never an isolated achievement. It was a single component in a regional plan, a node in a civilization-wide strategy for survival. This allows us to appreciate the true genius of these ancient engineers not as builders of things, but as shapers of worlds. They thought in terms of watersheds and slopes, of seasonal flows and long-term sustainability, designing with the whole ecosystem in mind. The laser's eye and the radar's whisper are finally allowing us to read their most important manuscript, not written on clay or stone, but inscribed directly into the skin of the earth, a testament to a vision that sought to harmonize human ambition with the relentless logic of water. That ancient tension between control and harmony echoes through the very philosophies that guided these civilizations. Does redirecting a river represent humanity's greatest triumph, a rightful mastery over a chaotic natural world, or does it reveal a dangerous hubris, an ethical overreach with costs we are still paying today? This was not a modern debate, but a fundamental divide visible at the dawn of engineering itself. On one side stood cultures like Mesopotamia, whose creation myths celebrated a god imposing order on a watery chaos. Their engineering was an extension of that sacred duty, a moral imperative to dominate the unpredictable flood, to build walls and dig channels that carved a human realm out of the wild. Water control was a divine mandate, and to not exercise that control was to risk a slide back into primordial disorder. This ethos viewed the river as a force to be subdued, a resource to be managed, a partner in a relationship where humanity held the reins. Yet other philosophies, often found in indigenous traditions around the world, articulated a profoundly different relationship. Many of these cultures viewed rivers not as resources, but as living ancestors, as sacred persons with their own rights and rhythms. To redirect such an entity was not an act of mastery, but a delicate negotiation requiring permission, offering, and a deep sense of reciprocity. The river's health was inseparable from the community's health, and engineering, when done, aimed for balance and coexistence rather than domination. This ancient philosophical fork in the road forces us to confront enduring ethical questions that are more urgent now than ever. Who truly owns a river? Is it the upstream city that diverts it, or the downstream communities and ecosystems that depend on its full flow? What gives one generation the right to fundamentally reshape a watershed for its own benefit, potentially compromising the well-being of generations to come? The salinized fields of Sumeria and the silted canals of forgotten empires are not just engineering failures, they are early warnings about the long-term ethical costs of short-term control. When we look at our own colossal hydrological projects today, the mega dams, the continent-spanning aqueducts, the drained wetlands, we must ask what values are embedded in their concrete. Are they built with the mindset of the Mesopotamian priest-king, imposing a singular human order upon a complex system, or do they strive for the harmony of the indigenous waterkeeper, seeking a sustainable balance within the system's own logic? Reflecting on these ancient practices challenges us to move beyond mere technical feasibility. It demands that we weigh human need against ecological responsibility and immediate gain against intergenerational justice. The most profound legacy of those first engineers may not be the canals they left behind, but the urgent ethical question they passed down to us. A question flowing through every pipe and reservoir. How do we use our power to shape the world without breaking it? The philosophical question of control versus harmony finds its practical answer in the landscapes these civilizations left behind. To truly grasp the diversity of their genius, picture a master canal builder from ancient Sumer, a man who knows the precise slope needed to carry the Euphrates for miles, suddenly transported to the mist-shrouded highlands of the Andes. He looks at the sheer mountain faces, the rushing torrents of meltwater, and the narrow valleys. His tools and his entire understanding of river management would be almost useless here. This stark contrast reveals a breathtaking truth across the isolated continents. Human societies faced the same fundamental challenge of water, but their solutions were spectacularly different, a case of convergent evolution in engineering. In the Old World river valleys of the Nile and the Tigris-Euphrates, the challenge was one of concentration and distribution. A single, massive, predictable or semi-predictable water source flowed through flat plains. The engineering response was accordingly centralized and monumental, focused on large-scale redirection. Pharaohs and kings marshaled state power to build basin networks and primary canals that acted like giant levers, moving the life force of the river to vast areas. This was hydraulic engineering as an act of singular, authoritative will, a top-down imposition of order. Now shift the scene to the New World. Here, the Maya in their rainforest confronted not a single river to tame, but the entire sky. Their challenge was one of capture and retention, managing the deluge of seasonal rains. Their response was not to redirect one major flow, but to reshape the very surface of the land into a sponge, creating the vast, decentralized grids of raised fields and reservoirs we now see through LiDAR. This was a diffuse, landscape-intensive system, a bottom-up form of engineering that worked with the local ecology, turning entire regions into productive water harvesting machines. Similarly, in the towering Andes, the Inca and their predecessors faced a vertical world. Their water did not come in a broad, placid river, but in crashing streams down precipitous slopes. Their iconic solution was the terrace. By cutting thousands of stone-lined steps into the mountainsides, they did more than create flat land for planting. Each terrace acted as a speed bump for rainwater, slowing its destructive runoff, allowing it to soak deeply into the soil, and preventing precious topsoil from washing away. Sophisticated stone canals then captured spring water and mountain runoff, directing it from one terrace level to the next with gravity-fed precision. This was hydraulic engineering as intricate jewelry, a meticulous fitting of human habitation into the most extreme geography. The comparison is illuminating. The Old World often asked, how do we bring the river to the land? The New World often asked, how do we keep the water on the land? One approach centralized control around a primary source, the other distributed intelligence across an entire watershed. This divergence was not a matter of superiority, but of brilliant adaptation. It proves that the drive to manage water is a universal human impulse, a non-negotiable foundation for complex society. Yet the form that management takes is a direct dialogue with the specific whispers and shouts of a local environment, the rainfall patterns, the soil type, the topography. The dazzling diversity of their innovation is a testament not to a single path to civilization, but to humanity's boundless creativity when survival itself depends on listening to the land and responding with ingenuity. The grand canals and towering aqueducts were never the work of a single brilliant mind. Behind every named engineer or deified king stood a vast, silent workforce whose hands shaped the earth and whose eyes watched the water's every subtle shift. To truly understand these systems, we must look beyond the monuments to the people who lived within them, whose daily lives were a continuous dialogue with the flow that sustained them. The official records, carved in stone or pressed into clay, celebrate the vision of rulers and the blessings of gods. They give us names like Imhotep, the legendary architect of Egypt's first pyramid, who was also credited with advanced medical knowledge and likely oversaw hydraulic works. Or Sennacherib, the Assyrian king who proudly listed the canals he built to supply Nineveh. These figures represent the top of a very tall social pyramid, the elite managers who commanded resources and claimed credit. But the knowledge required to keep a civilization alive was not held only in royal courts or temple archives. It was distributed like water itself through every level of society. Consider the farmer spending a lifetime coaxing crops from a single plot of land fed by a small canal. He may never have designed a city-wide system, but he possessed an intimate, granular wisdom. He knew exactly how long to let water soak into his particular soil type before draining it to prevent rot. He understood which weeds signaled a blockage upstream, or how the behavior of insects could foretell a change in the water table. This was applied hydrology, a science of observation and adaptation passed from parent to child through demonstration and story. This practical intelligence was the essential feedstock for the grander designs. When a royal surveyor arrived to plan a new branch canal, his calculations for slope and volume would have been informed by, and perhaps even dependent upon, the accumulated local knowledge of the farmers already working that stretch of land. They knew where the ground was firm, where springs emerged, and where the old river channel had once run. Their uncredited expertise made the abstract plans of the elite possible to execute on the living, unpredictable earth. Similarly, within the household sphere, often managed by women, there existed a profound mastery of small-scale water management. The tasks of collecting, storing, and distributing water for drinking, cooking, cleaning, and small garden plots required constant innovation and careful conservation. The design of efficient household water jars, the knowledge of how to keep a cistern clean, or the practice of using grey water to nourish plants, these were hydraulic technologies vital to daily survival. This domestic expertise formed a parallel stream of innovation, one that sustained the community from the ground up, even as the monumental works shaped it from the top down. Then there were the countless individuals whose contribution was sheer physical force. The construction and endless maintenance of these systems relied on conscripted laborers, often farmers working off their tax obligation during the flood season when fields were underwater. It relied on enslaved people whose lives and labor were commandeered by the state. These were the human engines who moved the mountains of earth, basket by basket, who dredged the choking silt from canals under the blistering sun, and who hauled the stone blocks for aqueduct piers. Theirs was a knowledge written in muscle and endurance, an understanding of collective rhythm and coordinated effort that turned a blueprint into a landscape. To acknowledge this diverse tapestry of contributors is not to diminish the achievements of the elite planners, but to humanize them. It reminds us that technological triumph is never a solitary act of genius. It is a social process, a convergence of different kinds of knowledge, the theoretical and the practical, the commanding and the conscripted. The true wonder is not that a king could order a canal dug, but that an entire society, across lines of gender and class, could pool its observations, its labor, and its inherited wisdom to negotiate so successfully with a river. The water that flowed through those channels carried with it the silent contributions of generations, a collective intelligence as vital and as pervasive as the current itself. That collective intelligence whispers to us across the centuries, not as a relic, but as a vital resource for our own survival. The covered drains of Mohenjo-Daro and the underground rivers of the Qanat are more than archaeological wonders. They are blueprints for resilience in a world facing its own water crises. Today, as our cities choke on stormwater and our aquifers sink toward depletion, we are relearning a term that honors that ancient wisdom, traditional ecological knowledge. This is not primitive folklore, but a sophisticated, time-tested understanding of local environments, accumulated through generations of careful observation and adaptation. It is the very mindset that allowed ancient engineers to succeed, and it represents a missing piece in our modern approach to climate change, scarcity, and flooding. Consider the modern challenge of urban stormwater. Our concrete jungles are designed to shed water as fast as possible, overloading sewers and polluting rivers. Now, innovative city planners are looking back to the distributed, absorbent logic of the mire-raised fields or the sponge-like cities of the ancient Indus. The result is green infrastructure, a concept directly inspired by these ancient principles. Instead of bigger pipes, we are building constructed wetlands that mimic nature's filtration, planting rain gardens that allow water to seep slowly into the earth, and restoring urban streams from their concrete straitjackets. These are not just engineering projects, they are applications of an ancient truth that working with a landscape's natural hydrology is more resilient than fighting against it. Similarly, in regions parched by drought, the ancient technology of the Qanat is experiencing a quiet revival. In places like Oman and Iran, communities are cleaning and restoring these ancient subterranean channels, recognizing their superior sustainability for groundwater management. Unlike energy-intensive modern wells that can drain an aquifer in decades, the Qanat taps water gently at a rate that matches the Earth's natural recharge. It is a lesson in patience and long-term thinking, a system that managed a resource for millennia without depleting it. This ancient wisdom is also resurfacing in the form of revived rainwater harvesting. In arid regions from India to the American Southwest, modern architects and farmers are rediscovering the power of simple catchment systems. from rooftop collection to the restoration of ancient check dams and contour trenches that slow runoff and let it replenish the soil. These are not nostalgic gestures, they are strategic adaptations proven by time to work within specific ecological niches. The core principles of those early engineers offer a powerful toolkit for our future. They observed their environment with a humility we often lack, adapting their solutions to local conditions rather than imposing a one-size-fits-all model. Most importantly, they thought in terms of generations, not quarterly reports. Their legacy challenges us to see water not as a commodity to be extracted, but as a cycle to be understood and sustained. In their silent canals and hidden tunnels lies a profound invitation to look back not for simple answers but for resilient strategies, proving that the most progressive path forward may be paved with ancient stones. The final course of this exploration leads us to a single, powerful truth. The story of ancient engineers redirecting rivers is not merely a technical history, it is the very story of civilization, written in water and earth. It is the story of our birth, our soaring ambitions, the social hierarchies we built, and the profound vulnerabilities we could never fully escape. Every innovation, from the celestial calendars of Sumer to the silent, underground rivers of Persia, represented a profound dialogue. On one side stood human ingenuity, patient and observant; on the other, the relentless, indifferent flow of nature. These pioneers, whose names we know and whose names we have forgotten, demonstrated a fundamental principle that echoes through the ages. To shape the course of a river is to shape the course of society itself. It concentrates power, it organizes labor, it defines law, and it draws the map upon which empires rise and fall. With that power comes immense peril, the slow poison of salinized fields, the social strain of centralized control, and the ultimate vulnerability to a climate that holds the final card. Their legacy is a dual inheritance, one of breathtaking inspiration and sobering caution. Let their successes, born of deep observation and adaptive genius, inspire our own creativity in facing the water challenges of our time. Let their unintended consequences, those slow-moving environmental feedbacks, caution against any hubris that believes we have fully mastered the systems we depend upon. Their story is not locked in the past, it flows directly into our present, asking us what kind of dialogue we will choose to have with the water cycles that sustain us. If this journey through the streams of history has offered a new perspective, the channel holds many more mysteries of the past waiting to be uncovered. Share your reflections below. Which of these ancient hydraulic marvels, from the Qanat to the raised field, do you find most astonishing? The flow of history continues, and to understand its deep, enduring currents is to find the wisdom we need to navigate our shared